All right, we're recording. Today we have Rabbi Debra Smith with us to talk with us about greening, one of the Jewish festivals. And this webinar will become a resource for the Green Seminary Initiative's website. Rabbi Deb is the rabbi in residence at Drew Theological Seminary and is the Jewish leader in the New Jersey area. And she'll share more about the specifics around that. And I'm really so grateful that you're with us, Rabbi Deb. It's been a gift to learn from you in the past, and so I'm grateful that you'll be teaching.
It's my pleasure to be here, and I hope that it's a fruitful discussion. So we're going to talk a little bit about the holiday of Shavuot. And the word Shavuot means weeks, and we're going to be looking at the weeks that fall between Passover, the beginning of Passover, and the actual day of Shavuot, which commemorates the receiving of the Torah at Sinai by the Jewish people. So way back in the day. So we're doing some ancient history and then bringing it forward to see how this can be relevant in these times today. So if you have questions, either of you, just put them in the chat box, and if it comes up on the screen, then I know I have it and I'll address it. Okay, I was just checking to see that. So names for Shavuot are also Pentecost and the Feast of Weeks, and it celebrates the giving and receiving of the Torah by the Jewish people to teach them how to live in the world. And this holiday began with agricultural background, agricultural significance, and has sort of morphed into something a bit different in the modern times. And we'll look at that a little bit as we go forward. So the biblical Shavuot, so now we're talking, the eldest, the older of the iterations of this. The Bible, the book of Deuteronomy, the fifth of the books of the Old Testament, tells us, you shall count off 7 weeks. Start to count the 7 weeks when the sickle is first put to the standing grain. Then you shall observe the Feast of Weeks for the Lord your God, offering your free will contribution according as the Lord your God has blessed you. So your free will contribution is what you bring, from the harvest, and you bring it and it's sacrificed or dedicated at the temple in Jerusalem, the temple with a capital T, that the farmers have brought there. And it also marked the rite and observance of a new agricultural season. So it marked the bringing of the first fruits from the land to the temple, to the holy temple. And each farmer would bring his first fruits whenever they ripened, which is any time during the period that began with Shavuot and ended in the fall, and would bring them to the temple. However, this holiday morphed over time, and the nature of it began to change following the destruction of the temple. So we're now talking 70 in the year CE. And without the temple, the agricultural rites of Shavuot could not be observed. And so at some point after 70 CE, in what we call the rabbinic period in Judaism, connections started to be made in order to keep it relevant to a new type of living. There was no more holy temple anymore. The connection started to be made by the rabbis as opposed to the priests who served in the temple. So this is a new class of leader based not on parental lineage, but on education and learning, that started to associate this holiday with the revelation at Sinai, the revelation of the Torah to the people. And so it supposedly took place during this month in the calendar, without an exact date being given, pretty close, and then this holiday in that rabbinic period became tied to the revelation at Sinai. And its earlier origins of the bringing of the first fruits of this harvest sort of faded away. And so the date then became fixed on the Jewish calendar. The month is called Sivan, S-I-V-A-N, and the date is the 6th of Sivan. So there's 2 ways to look at this holiday. And what I'm going to do is present them and then stop to see if you want to put any questions in the chat box, because it's a lot of information. So there's two tendencies for understanding the meaning of this holiday. One is to see it as the conclusion of Passover, that Passover, has an ending, and this is the ending. Or, to use it as an independent festival. And why it would be seen as the conclusion of Passover is that on Passover, at the second Seder, the second night of Passover, we do something that we continue to do for 49 days. And there's 49 days between Passover and Shavuot, this holiday of weeks. That's why it's called weeks, because we're counting these weeks. And how are we counting the days of these weeks? We're counting them by each night, counting what's called the Omer, O-M-E-R. And the Omer is a grain of barley. And each night we count a grain of barley from the harvest. And we say a blessing over that grain of barley, plus we count the day. So it's a blessing over the counting of the Omer, and another blessing over today is the third day in the counting of the Omer. Today is the fourth day in and we do this up to 49 days. When we get to a week, we say today is the week of, marks a week of, and then we would say today marks a week and a day of, and then would go on to 2 weeks, and then, and so on and so forth each day. Okay, this is flashing. Okay. Perhaps. Was that your question, Avi?
Yeah. So could the grain be one that is local to the community that is observing?
For them, it was barley, and I'm assuming in other places, but it was very localized to the temple region, and they had to make pilgrimage to the temple, so it couldn't have been that far away, and maybe that was the local grain, because people couldn't come from like the next state. They could just come, they pack up their stuff and they drag it on their backs and on their mules or whatever they were traveling with.
So do people who observe it now, do they use a local grain, or is there a particular,
So now it's a different kind of holiday. So now the holiday is not agriculturally based. Today it commemorates the receiving of the Torah. It's purely spiritual. Yeah. So that was a good question, by the way. So I'm glad you asked it, because that clarifies where it's gone. And so it's still counted as one of the 3 pilgrimage festivals on the Jewish calendar: Passover, Shavuot, and Sukkot in the fall, which is the Feast of Booths that takes place in the fall when they dwell in the sukkahs, the little booths with the thatched huts. So these are 3 pilgrimage festivals, which means they were associated with a crop of some sort that was in its season, that people would bring the first fruits of to the temple and give to the priests to sacrifice. And I'm just looking to see the date, around the 2nd century CE, Shavuot started to be called an Atzeret, A-T-Z-E-R-E-T. I can actually put that, let me enter that. Okay. I don't type too well, but century, C-E. Becomes an Atzeret. So if something is an Atzeret, it is the end piece of something. It's the end of something, an end of a holiday of some sort. And so it is seen as the conclusion it's an Atzeret of Passover. Okay, so it's the concluding piece to the Passover celebration. And that's why the omers are being counted, the grains are being counted, and they count them until this point, because this point is like the end, and now we're on to celebrating the revelation at Sinai. So let me just minimize that. And so that's what Atzeret means literally is, when God says to God's people, stay with me a little bit longer. Let's make this holiday just last another day, another drop. So it's like an add-on. So an Atzeret is a completion of a festival, and Shavuot concludes Passover. Passover and Shavuot, the counting of the Omer this is the link between the two holidays. It's a very holy period for people who observe it. And most of those people are into Kabbalah and mysticism, so that they have Omer counters, the way you have an Advent calendar, right? You can they count the 49 days, and each day is seen as a day where it's a different trait of personality that's looked at, like kindness or justice or mercy. And you focus little readings that they have and meditations each day on something. You might have a binder or a journal and all of that stuff. So the connections operate on a number of levels. And this is very interesting, because you're going to say, different grain. We count the barley grain, right? The grains of barley. But it could be that there is a connection between the wheat harvest and the exodus from Egypt to Sinai, so that there is a connection between liberation and revelation marked in the period of counting days. It's a little complicated by the grains, the different grains, but that's like not a big deal. I mean, it doesn't, the grain itself is not like a deciding issue here. So I want to pause now for any questions you might want to type into the chat box if there's anything you want to know. And if not, I'll tell you a little bit more about today, about in these times, what happens. So in these times, there are Shavuot the agricultural rituals of it stopped with the destruction of the temple. And it was an area where they went to Mount Sinai to receive the Torah. That was a green area at the foot of the mountain. It was very beautiful, they say. And it is neither, don't let your flocks or your herds graze there. Because when they came to make this dedication of their crops at the temple, they brought like the entire family. They brought a tent. They hung out there. They brought their flocks and everything. So one of the tradition is that you bring greenery into the synagogue, and you bring boughs of trees and like plants. And I've done this one year. I decorated an entire sanctuary. It was just magnificent, and all kinds of green plants and potted plants and vines, and you just put them all up on the pulpit area, and everything is beautiful all around the sanctuary, and it's just really nice. Yeah,
I said this is where we talked about how those cuttings can and should be locally sourced from the local area. Yeah, to make the celebration as sustainable as possible.
And that makes complete sense for how to make that sort of that connection. So that's one thing. And baskets of different things, and you could have that sort of is the connection with the baskets of the crops that they brought to the temple in the olden days. But having baskets there also, which if you're down from the Carolinas, you could do the seagrass baskets, and then they would be locally, that would be the stuff that's low. I just bought one of them when I was down there a couple of weeks ago. They're woven from the natural reeds and grasses of the area, so you could put things in the baskets. The rose is the most popular flower associated with this holiday. And
why is that?
Well, it's reinterpreted to mean that the law was given with a rose. It's just poetry. Shoshana is a name for a rose. So Shoshana. And so there was a custom, and I don't know that this is done now, but there was a custom to scatter spices and roses around the synagogue to make a beautiful fragrance in addition to the greens. And that I've never done. I haven't done that. Or to give people who are there at services myrtle to smell, the fresh myrtle. So these are customs that they come back to Midrash, to story. And the story is that the Israelites fainted from fear when God, talked to Moses, and Moses talked about the 10 commandments that he got from God. The people were like terrified, and they were fainting with fear. And when God began to utter the 10 commandments at Sinai, and so God had to revive them with fragrant spices. So you can also use a lot of fragrant spices that you get, or some of them that you grow yourself, if you have a garden and you do that. And it's said that this could be maybe likened to parallels with other folk customs, like decorating churches, with trees, at different season of the year back in the olden times. But that, the symbol of the roses, what they also do is they make paper cuttings. This holiday, people who are good with paper cutting art make paper cutting of like flowers or little figures, and these paper cuts are like magnificent, and they do that at that point, and they display them in the synagogue or in their home. And the other custom that's very popular is eating dairy foods at this holiday. This is the cheesecake holiday. So I always tease my congregants and I say, we're going to be eating cheesecake, and we eat cheesecake, blintzes with cheese in them, anything with cheese, cheese Danish, all of that stuff. And really, it's not a meat-eating holiday. You're not forbidden, but everyone knows it's a dairy holiday.
Why is that?
Well, there is a story, and we don't know how true it is, but there's always got to be a reason for everything, was that at that point, when the Israelites got the laws at Sinai, when they received the laws of kashrut at Sinai, they realized that their pots were not kosher. I mean, can you imagine that this really happened? I don't know how I feel about that. And so they ate uncooked dairy dishes instead, because they couldn't have separate dishes, because they didn't know yet that they were supposed to do that for keeping kosher. I don't know. I have to say I'm a little skeptical, but another explanation is that by eating dairy first and then eating meat later, we remember that 2 loaves were offered on Shavuot, and sometimes they dip dairy foods in honey, because the Torah is supposed to be as sweet as milk and honey. So it's the dairy and the sweetness, so that you put honey and milk under your tongue, and that's in the Song of Songs. So it quotes from the Song of Songs. Another custom for the holiday is, if you don't have a Hebrew name or you're converting, this is the holiday you want to convert on and take a Hebrew name, because they give the Hebrew name in the synagogue. Like, they'll call up anyone who doesn't have a Hebrew name, and they'll pick a name, haven't picked a name, and they'll receive their name at that time and get blessed. So imagine standing there amidst all the greenery, being blessed and receiving a name like Ruth, because this is the holiday when the Megillah of Ruth is read, the story of Ruth. And so it's famous for that.
Deb, Rabbi Deb, there's so many agricultural connections to that story, and the what it means to find a home and to glean and have food, and what it, I just think about what it means to feed people who are hungry and also know the land where your food comes from. That comes up in that story.
The corners, leaving the corners of the fields fallow, or so that people could go in and glean from the corners of the fields. And, that's very much in the Ruth story. And to make sure that no one goes hungry, to leave it there for people who need it to come and take it. So that's very much that story. Also, the holiday is a marriage holiday. It symbolizes the marriage of the people of Israel and God. So God as the groom and the people of Israel as the bride, and it's a celebration of marriage. We stay up all night on Shavuot and we study from all different kinds of texts and traditions. It's a night of study and eating, cheesecake. And then you pray during the day. There's a service and the Torah is read. The 10 Commandments are recited. They're chanted from the Torah. Everyone stands and hears them chanted. It's very, very special. We recreate receiving the 10 Commandments at Sinai and the Torah at Sinai. So that's a little bit of the background in history. I'm just looking to see those are the ancient customs. And because we're 2 people and I'm sort of doing this as a presentation as opposed to with a lot of questions coming in to interrupt my time flow. It's flowing pretty quickly, but I want to also talk about some of the recent customs as well, and about the decorating with trees. Those are two things that I think are major to look at. So the two customs that grew up out of this holiday are a lot of enjoying the bounty of the lands. And when they would bring the first fruits, there were elaborate processionals with all different colors and flowers and costumes and everything. And it was very, very beautiful when that happened. I think we lost Abby. So Barney, it's just you and me for now. And so that one of the famous things to do is to have a procession with singing and dancing to celebrate the plentiful crops of the land at this time. And they used to parade them up to the temple and place them on the altar as a dedication. And, now they try to duplicate that in some places where there are crops to duplicate that. And that's one of the special observances. Also, the decorating with houseplants and greenery and passing around the spices, as I talked about before. So those are the main holiday observances for this observance. And if you want to type any questions or observations into the chat box, that would be fine, because my formal presentation is going to draw to a close very soon. And then it would be for discussion. So I'm going to just go in and see if Abby is there and wants to offer anything. And we're going to wait a minute to see if she can get back on. Barney, are you good with waiting a minute until we see if she can get back? Just type me your response if you're okay with that. Okay, let me just pull this up. Okay, the question I always ask is how to inspire congregants. There are so many competing issues that greening gets postponed. Yeah, Abby, take a look at the question Barney just posted in the box. I think it's a real concern. I said to him that the formal part of my presentation I've completed, and now I wanted to look at issues of greening and so forth. So I don't know if you have a response to that, or that's something we can talk about.
I think we should talk about it. What's your what has been your experience about that?
Well, I'm sorry, say it again.
What has been your experience about greening? And Barney's question. Can you hear me?
Me? Yes, I can. So I think that one of the things about greening for this holiday is that people really like to get on board with it. Everyone can contribute. People can bring from their own gardens where they've planted and harvested things, even if they're not crops. They may be spices, and it's early here for it to be crops, depending on what you've got. But you could bring things that you've grown inside, like basil or some spices and any kinds of plants to decorate, and it becomes a communal project to sort of pitch in and decorate the sanctuary, and is very, very beautiful. And and also to duplicate the processional of bringing up to the altar in baskets and carrying potted plants and all kinds of things like that, I think is a very beautiful thing. So while there are a lot of competing issues, this is one holiday that's focused on the greening, and it's a good way to really work with it.
That's great.
I don't know if you have any
Yeah, I mean, all the things that you said are the things that I would have suggested too. Um, yeah.
I also was thinking when we were chatting before the call this afternoon, earlier this evening, whatever it was, that also to honor the grains, because you could
Hmm.
probably serve a nice assortment of different kinds of multigrain breads, or breads made from different grains, or foods made of barley. There's mushroom and barley soup. I mean, there's all kinds of things that you could really do a food, sort of a overarching meal of celebration and
Yeah.
acknowledgement and at this time. A meal of gratitude, really, um, and study while you eat. And it could be a very nice it could be a nice, actually, interfaith activity, because you're teaching greening and you're reviewing history and the sort of the richness of history and the agricultural roots of history, and bringing it into modern times as well. And, the modern link, I think, for me would be the corners of the fields. And how do you do that today? Or how do we give a portion of what we have or grow or cook, in our case, to people who are in need? It could be a food pantry thing.
Yeah, I also wonder about using that study time to learn about the plants and grains and trees in the area that are part of the ceremony or
The
the
different species,
celebration.
the different
Yeah,
species,
you
or
get,
even to do a park cleanup at this
yeah,
time. For us here, that's the season you'd want to clean it up. I know I live in a condo and they're cleaning everything here. They're raking it. And, this is the time that they're mulching and weed whacking and, everything but it's a good time to do that and make it a community project.
yeah, that's great.
So some thoughts that just,
Barney says cleanups in Westchester all seem
yes,
to be on Saturdays. So I
yes,
wonder what it
that's
would be
where
like
I'm
to
from, by the way. I'm from Westchester, so I know all about that. So, but
Yeah,
yeah,
so I wonder
so
what it
I'm
would be like to have a community host it, right? And to say we're going to do it on Sunday because it's not
right.
our Sabbath, right? Yeah, I wonder what that would be like.
But I think that would be an interesting observance of something, and sort of
Hmm.
a remembering, and it's like celebrating an ancient tradition that, while it became religious in that the Torah was given at that time, really had ancient roots. But to teach both the ancient and honor the ancient with the processions and have a parade, why not have a parade with all kinds of colored plants and flowers and spices, and parade them somewhere and actually put them down on a table or something that was decorated real pretty, and have music and read some old stories from, tradition about the earth and caring for the earth, and, having all sorts of fun and games and things you could do, but really making it a very spiritual experience too for communities.
Hmm.
And what would
Yeah.
everyone dedicate? What would everyone bring to that altar that they could dedicate or donate for the feeding of those in need, those who are less fortunate, who would be gleaning? How could we create a modern gleaning situation? Would it be a store, an impromptu store or market that would be set
Hmm.
up and people could come, or it would be donated, to the food pantry or to social services or something.
That's great. Barney, do you have anything to share from your experience? It sounds
So
like
those are my.
well, this has been really great. I can't tell if Barney has. I'm sorry. Yeah. Okay. This has been really great. I've learned a ton um, about Judaism and ecology. Oh, Barney just said that their old rabbi was a green faith fellow and their new one is not so much. Yeah, so I hope that that you'll draw on Rabbi Deb as a particular resource for your community, because it sounds like you might need it tactfully. I think as leaders of communities, we always need support when we aren't focused in on particular issues. We need.
I'm reading his comment. I'm just trying to.
Yeah. I think sometimes we need like some outside support when we're not doing the thing that maybe we need a little bit of help with. So, yeah, that sounds like you might have a task, Rabbi Deb. Yeah.
One thing I like is I like to make the links and the connections. And I think that in a holiday like this, the pilgrimage festival holidays like this one have their religious significance, but they also can be very significant in terms of the greening issues and environmental issues, and that those are ones that everyone could gather together around to really try to support. So,
yeah. Yeah.
So if you have other questions, you can always email me, to supplement this. But I think for starters, you've got a good sort of overview of Shavuot and how you can use it in a green faith type of way, so to speak, in a green type of way.
This is really great. I'm so grateful, Rabbi Deb, that you have taken the time to do some teaching. This webinar will be available on our website, and alongside of that, we'll add some additional resources.
I think you have one new message.
Barney just said he's got a bunch of articles that he's written, and so Barney, I'll be reaching out to you to connect with you about those resources. Thank you.
Oh, that's great. That's wonderful. So you'll have some additional resources to add to your
to the website. Yeah, I'm so delighted.
That's great. So I hope I've been useful, and please feel free to call on me anytime in the future you'd like to do a different holiday or a different type of project. And whoever accesses the recordings is welcome to reach out to me as well. So happy to be a resource.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. And thank you for having me.
And we'll have another one of these for another holiday. That's so great. All right. Take good care, everyone.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Good night. Good night. Night.
Good night.